Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about two different videos worth of cardiovascular exercise information. I'm splitting this up into two videos because they're two different types of modality of exercise. The first we're going to talk about is just kind of some generic aerobic activity that you can use to start exercising well. The second set is going to be a more higher intensity. It's far more taxing and a lot of beginning exercisers don't enjoy it quite as much. So today we're going to start with what almost anybody can do. Generic aerobic exercise essentially just means any physical activity that elevates your heart rate to a high enough level that it's actually challenging. Like we talked about before, your body adapts to challenge. If we're not making things harder, we're not going to expend more energy, which is how we lose weight. And we're also not going to make our heart and lungs healthier. We need that in order to have more energy and utilize it more efficiently. So where are we going with that? Well, there are two different modalities of exercise. We call them moderate intensity and vigorous intensity exercise, and we judge those based on your heart rate. The higher your heart rate goes, the less time you have to spend working to get the exact same amount of work. It makes a fair amount of sense, actually. What the ACSM, which is the American College of Sports Medicine, and the United States Surgeon General have determined is that in order to be challenged appropriately, if we're exercising at a moderate level, we should spend about 60 minutes doing this. Versus if we're being worked at a vigorous level, we only need to spend 30. Now, those are goal numbers. If you're a beginning exerciser and you can't make 60 minutes of an exercise, that's okay. Work up to it. Whatever you can do for right now, that's your place to start. And your goal is just to increase that incrementally until you can reach your goals. Now, the other really nice information is that you don't need to do all of that time at once, whether you're in that 30 or 60 minute group. You can do as little as 10 minutes at a time, and it's still going to add up to the appropriate amount of work throughout the day, and we found that it doesn't actually harm you to split it up into increments. You're not getting any less benefit than somebody who pushes through all 60 minutes at once if you're doing 6 sets of 10, or all 30 minutes at once if you're doing 3 sets of 10, or 2 sets of 15. Whatever you need to make your schedule work and make your life a little bit less boring, you are perfectly allowed to do. There's a lot of adaptability in this, and it kind of just depends on what you enjoy and where you're going to be going with this. Now, how do we figure out what's moderate intensity and what's vigorous intensity? Well, it kind of depends on the person, so we're going to use what's called the heart rate formula. What we need is a couple basic numbers. Number one, what is your resting heart rate? This is relatively easy to determine. All I need to do is relatively relaxed, so for about 5 minutes at a time. While you can do this sitting, it's optimal if you can do this lying down. That's where your body has to do the least amount of work. And what we're trying to do is figure out how hard your heart has to work when it's not doing absolutely anything but keeping you alive. That is your true resting heart rate. How I do this is after that period of about 5 minutes of rest, I just feel my artery, count how many times it beats in 15 seconds, and multiply it by 4 to get my total beats per minute. A lot of people actually already have something built into their phone that will allow them to figure out their heart rate just by placing their thumb on a sensor, or usually around the home button. If you have that, that's great, because that you can also use in exercise. Well, you can also use the palpation modality of figuring out, all right, how many beats am I going through? It's a little bit less fun to do when you have to do math when you're already mentally taxed from doing exercise. But now that we have our resting heart rate, we also want to know what the other end of the scale is. How high can I go safely? The basic formula we tend to use for this is the number 220 minus how many years old you are. So in my case, being almost 30, my safest maximum heart rate is about 190 beats per minute. If I go too far beyond that, I'm taxing my heart a little bit too much, and it might start to become dangerous. So I want to avoid that maximum number. The space in between these two, between my resting heart rate and my maximum safe heart rate, is known as my heart rate reserve. That reserve is how much room to play I have to figure out where I can safely act. So what do we do with that number? Well, based on percentages of that number, we can determine how active we are. Am I moderate or am I vigorous? Usually if I'm between 50 to 75% of that number, I'm more in that moderate range. Actually, probably 70 is a little bit closer. More if I'm working that 75 to 85 to 90%, now I'm at vigorous. So what do we do with that math? Well, I'm going to include all these formulas in the description below. But assuming we've calculated our base heart rate and our highest heart rate, and we can figure out the heart rate reserve from there, we're going to take that middle space. That heart rate reserve gets multiplied by your desired percentage. So let's say I'm operating at about 50% is my goal. So I take my middle ground, so 190, which is my maximum, minus about 60 is my personal resting. Between there is about 130. If I want to go about 50% of that, I'm at about 65 beats per minute. I add that to my resting, 60 plus 65 is 125. That's what it takes, beats per minute of 125, hi cat, for me to get at enough exercise that I'm exercising at least a moderate level. I can go up to about 70-75% of that before I'm pushing into the more vigorous end. If I want to do that math for the vigorous end, I do the same thing but with a different percentage. I like to pick something in the middle, so I just have a little bit of a buffer on either side so I know what my average goal is. From there, I just need to figure out, all right, well, that's how much time I'm at. I can go a different route of this though. I can also measure what my heart rate is after an exercise that I tend to enjoy and do that math in reverse. So let's say my heart rate comes out to about 160 beats per minute after boxing. It's about average for me. So let's say I subtract 60, my resting heart rate, from that. That gives me 100. I figure out 100 divided by 130 gives me the percentage of how much I was exercising. All right, well that percentage will tell me, am I doing moderate or vigorous intensity based on those standards we talked about before. Again, those will be in the description. So I figure out how much time I need to spend at that level to reach my goals. If I'm in the vigorous intensity range, oh wow, I can only do 30 minutes of that and it's still an effective workout. If I'm below that, I should be doing about an hour as my end goal. Again, I don't have to start there, but over time I want to be able to build up to that much time per day. Relatively straightforward, right? So all of those formulas just tell me what I'm resting at, what my max is, and what's in between, and what percentage I'm working at of that. Once I hit the desired percentage, I just determine how much time total I need to spend doing it. Now, weightlifting, depending on how heavy that goes and what your heart rate's at after weightlifting, might actually work towards your cardiovascular goals. Figure out what your heart rate is after weightlifting, and it might be something that you can use to add into your total set. It means that we don't have to be doing 3 hours a day of exercise to be getting something good out of it. Very often, as little as a half an hour, depending on the intensity you're doing it, can be plenty. So, figure out what your goals are. What do you enjoy doing? What will you stick with? And how intense do you have to be working out for that to really get towards your goals? Next up, we're going to talk about a different type of exercise. It's something called interval training. This is usually designed for people who are at a little bit higher athletic level. So if you've been doing things for a little bit longer, this will be the next video for you to watch to figure out how do I push myself a little bit harder and work a little bit more efficiently. Have a great one, everybody.